The Michael Berry Show.
20 years ago, George W. Bush was the president. A lot of folks you and I knew were serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. The death toll was disturbing. Every community in the country was affected. My, how things have changed in 20 years. I never forget the first reference I heard to Lone Survivor. My brother Chris had read the book, and he said, "Have you read this book, Lone Survivor?" He said, "Do you know who Marcus Luttrell is?" I said, "I don't." He's written this book called Lone Survivor. Okay. It's about, they went in Operation Red Wings. They went into Afghanistan, and he's the only one who came out. It's a story, man. Wow. It is. It's incredible. It's disturbing. Then they make the movie. Then we get to meet Marcus. Then we develop a friendship, and a lot has happened in those 20 years. It's time to revisit that 20 years later. Marcus Luttrell, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Good morning.
What were you doing just before you came on the show this morning?
All right, with complete transparency, one of my labs got hit by a skunk yesterday, and I'm out here trying to bathe her. And I don't know when the last time you've had that happen, but brother, it's something. So that's kind of what I'm dealing with right now.
I was thinking of a great headline for this discussion, and I already have it. Lone Survivor Navy SEAL Marcus Luttrell admitted douching before interview.
Right. I don't, because the first thing she did when she got hit was come in and get on the couch. So when I walked in, I didn't know what I could smell it. And I don't know. They just do that, right?
Yeah.
What remedy do you use to get rid of that funk?
Marcus, we had a place out in Carmine next to Chapel Hill, and we had 2 dogs get hit 2 consecutive weekends. And we went to, I called my buddies that were veterinarians, and they said, go get Massengill douche. That is the best. I came back and talked about it on the air. I heard every solution known to mankind. I think it's a mess no matter what you do. Have you decided what you're doing?
So I go with the hydrogen peroxide and the palm olive.
Okay. Yeah.
To dissolve, because it's an oil, right? It's oil-based?
Yep.
And the thing about it is when she goes, it's good. They need to bottle that up and use it and give it to people for defense.
Let's talk about how
if you're getting attacked and you smack somebody with that, they're not going to stick around.
No. Even a porcupine, you could hide behind a shield with a porcupine, but that skunk, that's bad stuff. Let's tell the story you've told before, but I think people should know how you and Morgan decided you wanted to be Navy SEALs and began training at a very young age, and the man who put you through that program.
It was Morgan's idea. He came down. I was feeding the horses, and he's like, "Hey, I know what we're going to do. We're going to be Navy SEALs. It's going to be great. We get to jump out of airplanes. We get to shoot guns. We get to blow things up. We get to scuba dive, and there's a really good chance we're going to die." And I was like, "Okay, sign me up." Being the younger brother, I kind of followed him around everywhere. He came up with the ideas, but I usually had to go first. So that's when that happened. We were new teenagers, 14, 15 years old, and there was a gentleman who lived in town. We actually grew up with his daughter. We were in the same grade, and he would come into the high school and work the kids out in the gym. And then he had a reputation for training young men to go into the military, into the special forces. His name was Billy. So we got the courage to go ask him to train us. I mean, I walked up on him. I'll never forget it. And caught him during dinner time. Got a piece of fried chicken in his hand. And he's like, knocked on the door. He's like, "What do you want?" And I was like, "Well, sir, we want to be Navy SEALs. We heard you train people to do that. We was wondering if you would train us." And he kind of looked at me for a little bit. And I had some buddies with me. He looked over my shoulder and he told us 4:30 tomorrow. And he slammed the door in our face. So we left. And then the next day we showed up at 4:30. Matter of fact, this was my first life lesson that I ever got taught with him. Kind of stands true to this very day. someone tells you to be somewhere at a certain time, you're always 15 minutes early. Mm-hmm. Well, we showed up at 4:30, which is not on time. And he was out there waiting on us. I remember running up to the yard. He was pointing at us and at the ground. He's pointing at his watch and at us and at the ground. And then when we got within the yard, he was cussing us up one side and down the other. I mean, good. Some people just have a gift for profanity. He does. He has that. and they can apply it in certain ways and then it's really, really impactful. I still remember it. I mean, bro, this is over 20 years ago. And he stopped us in the street, and he drew a line in the dirt with his boot heel. And he said, every day you come here, I'm gonna ask you to cross this line. He goes, what you're wanting to do and where you're going is a voluntary program. He goes, you should probably quit right now, because if you cross this line, I'm gonna beat you. I'm gonna do everything I can to break you. He's like, I'm not your mother. I don't care whether you live or die. And he said, when a man goes to war, his brain turns to water and runs out of his ears, and all he has to go on is instinct and the guy to the right and to the left of him. He's like, if you want a little bit of that, cross the line. At that age, you're invincible. You still, you walk around with immortality. You can feel it when you're that age. Everything heals up the way it's supposed to. So we did. We crossed the line. And I remember he dropped us down to do some push-ups. He's like, everybody on your face, give me 300 push-ups for being late. And that's not a lot of push-ups, but if you got some guys who aren't in shape, you're going to be paying the man. So that's kind of what happened to us. We started mashing the deck, going down, up and down, and we got out of sync. We started to teeter-totter a little bit, and he stopped us. And I'll never forget, he goes, as a team, you're going to go down together, and you're going to come up together, you're going to live together, and you're going to die together. He goes, you're not a team, start over. And that's how it started for us. And he just, from that moment on, he weighed into us pretty hard. I remember we probably got an hour into it, a couple hours into it, we couldn't get those push-ups down. And he got so sick and tired of us that he kicked us off his property. He's like, go home. He goes, you're a disgrace to your family. He goes, when you get home, walk right up to your dad and punch him in the face and tell him to start over because he effed up on you. And he said, if you want to do this again tomorrow, show up on time. Don't ever be late. My time is the one thing I can't control. I don't have any bearing over it. So I'm not going to waste it on you if you're not going to show up on time. And that was the first lesson he taught me. And all of us, actually. Kind of grew from there.
How much older than you is Morgan?
7 minutes.
Oh, that makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it?
It would have been back in the day. He'd have been the king.
Marcus Luttrell is our guest. We're going to Afghanistan and Operation Red Wings and Lone Survivor and all of that coming up.
Well. Lucky you. The Michael Berry Show continues.
This must be your lucky day.
Our guest is Lone Survivor Marcus Luttrell, 20 years after Operation Red Wings. Marcus, let's rocket forward to you getting orders to go to Afghanistan. How did that come down?
So they split the platoon in half. In the SEAL teams, there's troops and there's platoons. And since there was 2 wars going down at the same time, there was more than enough work to go around. And our particular platoon was specialized in reconnaissance. I was with special deliveries. So we were a smaller unit. But what would happen is they would split us down the middle and kind of pimp us out to the other SEAL teams because of our specialty. So when it came time to see who was going where, my half of the platoon was tasked to go to Afghanistan, and the rest of our guys went to Iraq. And that's how that worked out.
Were you and Morgan intentionally split?
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Especially in the beginning. I went through SEAL training before him, so I was ahead of him a little bit, but eventually we wound up back together. And the only stipulation on that was, especially in the beginning, is we weren't allowed to ride in the same helicopters or the same Humvees. And when I got initially into the teams, I got sent to Iraq first, and he got sent to Afghanistan. And then when I got back from Iraq, I got sent to Afghanistan. So it was one of those deals. We were kind of missing each other back and forth. Eventually wound up together in Iraq, but in the beginning, we were separated by the wars.
So tell me about the training for Red Wings.
We started, well, the thing about Navy SEALs is we're constantly training. If we're not sleeping or eating or working out, then it's always training, work up for training. And then, like I said, our job was special reconnaissance. We were doing a lot of direct action missions, village takedowns, snatch and grabs, sniper overwatches, meaning it was desolate country out there. It's completely different fighting than we're talking about in Iraq and the city. So we were doing a lot of helicopter reconnaissance, and then we would fast rope in, and they would drop us off in the mountains and leave us anywhere from 5, 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, and then they would resupply us by airdrop. So we were kind of the eyes on. If any unit does a hit or they go in, they're always going to have eyes on the target first to kind of get an idea of what was going on, and that was our job. So it was constantly working with the helicopter units, getting that online. The satellite imagery was getting pretty good back in 2005. It's not like it is now where you can see everything and through walls, but back then the imagery was getting pretty good. So we were doing a lot of map studies, switching up our gear, making sure everything was good enough, and we were well prepared for whatever environment when we got in, because the terrain would change with the miles. So it was constant preparation and training.
So take me through the moment you're on the side of the mountain and you're there to get the bad guy, and these goat herders come upon you.
So we were separated probably about enough to where we could barely see each other. So not enough to where we were sitting right beside each other to make a big signature, but far enough away from each other that if we needed to get to each other, we could. And the terrain really wasn't conducive for a perfect setup. So we had perched up. We were well over 10,000 feet on the side of this mountain. So imagine a volcano with a village stuck down in the bottom of it, and we came in over the top of it. So what we did was we kind of roped down and climbed down inside of the volcano itself so we could get a better vantage point on what was going on in the village. We set up in a triangle formation. I was at the top of it. The top of the mountain was probably 15, 20 meters above my head. And then Danny and Mikey was right underneath me. And then on my right and left flank was Danny and Axe. I may be saying that wrong. I think Mikey might have been underneath me. It's been a minute now. But anyways, we set up, started watching the target. And the sun had come up. We had been there overnight. And we were just monitoring all the activity when we had to move. So we relocated onto a finger that was sitting off the side of the mountain so we could get a better vantage on some of the houses. And when we did that, about an hour after setup, a shepherd walked up on us. And I mean, he walked right up on us. And I'll never forget the look on this dude's face, because he had no idea we were there at all. And we grabbed him and pulled him off to the side and started to interrogate him. And then about that time, 2 more came up the mountain. And we snatched them up and sat them down. And then the herd of goats came walking up. I remember there was a dog there, which was kind of odd because they usually don't keep dogs. But I remember there was a big old freaking mangy dog that was barking. And so we started going through the numbers of what to do. And eventually what happened was we turned them loose, and then they left. We watched them leave. And then we relocated back into a different position back on the side of the mountain. Right after that, about an hour or so, is when the main body came up on top of us. And it was
and they came up on top of you. You know they've come up on top of you. You didn't see them or hear them. Just bullets start whizzing.
Right, so they're extremely quiet. Yeah, and you can't take anything away from them as an enemy, because they are great at what they do. They know that terrain. They're a formidable force, and I'll always pay them respect like that. I mean, they can fight. So at first I kind of looked down, and it was Axe that was below me. And I remember him looking past me. He was tucked down behind this rock, and he had his rifle up. So I kind of looked around and looked back up above me, and there was a huge tree. And this guy, I saw an AK muzzle come around it, and then the guy, he was hooded up, turned around and looked down into us. So I rolled my rifle up, and when I went to take a shot, he pulled his head back around the tree. And when I came off my scope, I could look right above me to my left and right, and there was guys setting up over the top of us and down on the side of it. And then I remember looking over at Mikey. I said, "Get back on the clock. We're fixing to get it on." And then I turned back around and waited. And eventually what happened was that guy pulled his head around that tree to take a shot. And when he did, I dumped him. And when I dumped him, it was game on. They kind of unleashed, and the fight commenced. And eventually what happened was we got pushed out of that position. And the terrain was so violent that we kind of started tumbling down the mountain.
How long was it until one of you had been hit?
That was probably on the initial while we were still in there, so pretty quick. And then systematically, each guy started getting shot while we were going down the mountain.
All right, hold on just a moment. Marcus Luttrell is our guest. And of course, his diary would be published, and Lone Survivor would be a bestseller. The movie would be made, and a nation was riveted. We were at war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I think that really humanized the two guys from that time that I grew to have such incredible respect for were Marcus Luttrell and his peers, his Navy SEALs, and Chris Kyle. And I think the entire country was absolutely, and still is, riveted by this story. So it has become a firefight. Tell me, Marcus, what happens from there?
Once that thing started, it was kind of a free-for-all. They had us covered on three sides, so the only way we could go was down the mountain. And then a couple hours into that, they had come up from the base of the mountain from the village, so they had us in a 360-degree loop. There wasn't really anywhere we could go, which means you had to keep moving the entire time. The hardest thing to hit is a moving target. But because of the terrain and the altitude, just making the movement was tough enough. And by a couple hours into it, everyone was so exhausted and shot up that they just systematically picked us apart one by one as we were going down the mountain. And then at the end of the day, I had slipped into this ravine and kind of was laid in between these rocks. And I just laid there. I was paralyzed from the waist down. I'd been shot up pretty bad and fragged, and my back was broken and stuff. And as the sun went down, I just laid there, and I couldn't move. I waited and waited, and then eventually I started to crawl out of there and just started moving. And I crawled all night into the next morning and halfway through the next day before the villagers found me. It was right next to a waterfall and a river.
You've talked about not knowing how far you went, and you know, you weren't at yourself, as my grandmother would say. But if you were to estimate how far you crawled, what would that be?
Oh, so we know now. They've done a map study, and I've gotten debriefed by everyone who had anything to do with the mission, and I crawled about 7 miles.
And you started how much after sundown or after it got dark?
Probably about almost a couple hours afterwards. I just started making movement. When I couldn't hear anything, and when I thought that they had returned to base, I just started moving.
And there was zero chance you would have survived if you'd stayed there. They would have found you, right?
Absolutely, because the helicopter had gotten shot down, which brought more reinforcements from them in. So the mountain was saturated with the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda. They kind of worked together in that area. So it's the Hornet's Nest is where we were at. And we had slipped in there under the cover of darkness. So when the sun came up and everybody was making movement, it was saturated.
When you saw I'm assuming you saw the Chinook shot down?
I didn't. That's how loud it was that I couldn't hear it or see it get shot down and roll down the mountain. I had my eardrums have been busted out. I was bleeding out everywhere, so I didn't know that. I found that out when I was in the village and the Taliban got a hold of me. They told me one of the guys was wearing a wedding ring. He said it was from one of my buddies. He was trying to tell me that they had shot a helicopter down and that a bunch of SEALs had died, but I wouldn't believe it And then when I got back to when y'all finally found me and brought me back is when I got the news that was solid.
I'm going to ask a stupid question. Why couldn't they get the comms up? You know, you talk about this in the book, and that's a central theme to the movie. Why couldn't they manage to get comms back to the base? I mean, was the equipment not good enough, or what was the issue?
No, that has to do with location and where we were set up, and they're just intermittent. Sometimes they come in and sometimes they come out. There's no really solid answer for why that happens. I know today with technology, you can. It's the same premise of why your cell phone, why you lose signal in certain areas. We don't. Why can I stand right here and then go 2 feet to the right and not have, or I can make communications? It's the same principle, but go way back. And when you get into 2005 and you're dealing with a SATCOM radio, and then the planes moving overhead and the relays that we had back and forth, it was just intermittent. That's just the way it worked. That's why we have checkpoints and waypoints as we're going along. So if we do miss a comm window, then there's another checkpoint. When we get to that, we can radio back in before everyone starts losing their mind and trying to come get us.
Do you remember the first hit you took?
Yeah, I guess. Oh, yeah. You don't forget it. Absolutely.
What's going through your mind?
It sent me over a lot. Well, until you get hit, you don't know. You just have this anticipation of what it feels like. And there's a difference between when you have this mentality of when you're hunting men. I remember having that. Like, it kind of flowed through me. My job when we went out was to hunt things down. And then it's a completely different feeling when someone's hunting you. And they've got you in their sights, because a lot of times you couldn't see where it was so loud. And at distance, you didn't have any idea where the bullets were coming from. So I remember thinking when I got hit that first time and I fell and it knocked me out. And when I came to, the smell, that's the one thing that you can't duplicate, is the smell of death when that's around, and how the ground was on fire too. And I remember the smoke and all that stuff like that. It just kind of hit me pretty hard. And then it changed the dynamic, the way you move. For sure.
You told me one time that as brutal as the movie is, it's 2 hours long, and the firefight lasted far longer than that. And of course, you're in the middle of it, and the smells and the sounds and all that. What is the thing that the movie was least able to convey that you remember vividly?
Oh, bringing me out of there. If there would be another movie made, it would be about the ending, the way that what it took to get me out of there, and pay respect and give acknowledgement to everything that went to pulling me out. That in itself is a story, because it happened at night. In the movie they made, Lone Survivor, it was a daytime rescue, and in reality, it was at night. And I mean, it was a free for all, crazy scenario, storms, and everyone was out there. It was probably the most intimidating time, because I didn't, you think I'm getting rescued, but then there's always a chance you can die. And when they finally got me onto the helicopter and we left out of there, there was a roller coaster of emotions for sure. But the one thing that we didn't capture in the film, and like I said, we just didn't have enough time, was the ending, how they actually had to, and what they had to go through to rescue me. Because everyone who was in theater was involved in getting me out of there, for sure. And then the follow-on to get all the guys off the mountain. Remember, our teammates were still laying out there. We had a helicopter go down that had 16 guys on it. They had to recover all those guys. They were taking fire. It was a crazy scenario, for sure.
The letter that you wrote that was carried to the American military, what was on there?
It had my name, what operation I was with, and what condition I was in. And then it also told them that the guy who delivered the message was one of the guys that rescued me and was trying to save my life.
And you wrote all that out, wounded as you were?
I did. I had a little help. Yeah, they brought me some a pencil and I had a paper already, and then, yeah, I got that done.
Hold on. Marcus Luttrell's our guest.
What's the name you say? Michael Betty.
Marcus Luttrell is our guest, 20 years after Operation Red Wings. Hard to believe it's been 20 years. He has agreed to stay with us a little extra because everything I want to know won't make it into this segment. I could talk to him for hours on end and have. There's so many things he can't tell or doesn't tell that are fascinating about all of this and his incredible life. Marcus Luttrell is our guest. Marcus, you mentioned that the extrication of you, the rescue of you, didn't get covered properly in the movie because you couldn't give everything justice. What are some things we didn't see?
Okay, so I was there's a hodgepodge of guys who finally found me, and if you could have seen them, I mean, it looked something straight out of a movie when they came in there. They were beat up. Just to get to me was an event. Just to find me. And then once they found me, they surrounded the village, and then the village was surrounded by the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda just to keep me safe. And then they had moved me down the mountain into this little ravine area. I hadn't thought about this in a minute. And we sat up, and it was dark. So by now the sun had gone down. And the helicopter had to come in from the base of the mountain. And we were so high up on the mountain that all it was fuel and ammo. And I remember they had some water on there for the guys because the guys who found me were out of water. And then a firefight ensued. And then above the mountain were a bunch of fixed-wing aircraft that were dropping ordnance down on the bad guys. And then in the distance, at the base of the mountain, so down the mountain there was a river, and the helicopter was kind of coming up the river, and the call sign of the guy who was flying the bird's name was Spanky. It was Jeff Peterson. Great freaking guy. And he'll tell you, it was so dark, and by this time they had juiced me up, so I was kind of having a good time. Like I wasn't feeling any pain anymore, and I was just kind of sitting there watching all of our guys do their thing, and it was the most amazing thing to watch them work. Normally when you're in something, you can't anticipate with that, but when I had a chance to step back and actually watch our guys go to war, and it was awesome. And then that helicopter, bro, it came up over the side of that cliff, and the dust kicked up. And so it's called a brownout. We couldn't see anything. Well, when he came to land, the ravine we were on was about as wide as the helicopter itself. And he goes, when that dust came up, I couldn't see nothing. And then there was PJs in the back of the bird trying to land it, trying to tell them how far from the ground they were, and nobody could see anything. And the helicopter actually had rotated. So when the nose came over, it had spun around, and the tail was facing us. And then he goes, there was a plant hanging from one of the houses that was on the side of the mountain. He goes, I was kind of looking at that thing, and I just sat it down. And he did. He stuck it. Well, the Green Berets, they picked me up and were carrying me towards the helo, and I was dressed up in man jammies, so I looked like an Afghani. And they pulled me up at the tail. So you don't come up on the tail rotor. So the PJs turned around to actually take a shot at us. And they had their lasers up, and their lasers hit our glint tape, and that's how they knew not to shoot. So I almost got killed on the rescue. Which is,
wow.
They told me that later. I was like, I'm glad you didn't shoot me. And then they threw me on the helicopter, and we sat there for a while because they had to unload the water for all the guys who were still on the mountain because they had to go on a follow-on mission. They didn't even come home with me. And then we sat there, and then the helicopter, I remember, dumped off the side of the mountain. That PJ came up, he asked me, he's like, who's your superhero? And I was like, Spider-Man. And I asked him my dog's name. I told him that. It's kind of verification code. And we went back, and we landed, and they're still in a firefight. We landed on a base, and then they transferred me from a helicopter to a C-130 medical bird and kind of laid me down and started going to work on me. And then they flew me from there to Bagram Air Force Base, where the rest of my platoon and all the SEALs were waiting on me to get back. But yeah.
And how does that look when they bring you in? Tell me about that.
So the ramp dropped on the helicopter, on the back of the plane, and they had to pick me. I couldn't really walk, so they picked me up and were carrying me down. I had IV stuck out of me, and they, like I said, they had bandaged me up. And I remember there was a lady standing by the ramp, and she covered her face and started crying. I guess I looked worse than I thought. And then they transferred me to these vans. There was a bunch of vans sitting there, and they put me in one of those, and then they took me to the hospital. And then while I was in the hospital, is when we kind of started the debrief. I tried to tell them, because all my guys were still out there, I tried to tell them where I was and in relation to where they thought we were. And it all started from there. And then I was in the hospital for a minute. Go ahead.
Are you able to talk at that point? I mean, what does that look like?
I was able to talk. The villagers did a great job of taking care of me. I mean, they doctored me up twice a day, bandaged my wounds, made sure my pain was down. So I was really. I had a doctor in the village, and they saved my life for sure. And then when I got back, all the Army guys started working on me, and then we started doing the debrief so they could go out and find our other guys and bring them back. And I think that took about 2 weeks to find all the guys, if I'm not mistaken.
So,
and then I got transferred back to the States.
In the movie, there is a conflict within the village. Gulab brings you back, and that not everyone in the village wants you there because that brings problems on them. Tell me a little bit about your reception in the village to the extent you remember it.
Just like that. Oh, there was some in there that didn't want me in there, and I could tell immediately who they were. They weren't trying to hide that for sure. And then there were the villages and the elder and Gulab. They were making sure that I stayed safe, and they put a rotating guard on me. I was in there for almost 5 days, and then there was some people in the village that were trying to sell me, because the Taliban would show up every day negotiating for my head. And they would tell me about it. They'd sit down in my room and have these little powwows and these meetings, and then, which was kind of frustrating because I didn't speak the language that well. I didn't understand what they were saying, but I could get the concept of what was going down. And then eventually, when the Green Berets and Rangers found me, I was tucked in underneath this rock in a riverbed. And because they moved me around the village systematically and strategically all day and every day through the night. So the Taliban would get a bead on the room that I was in, and they'd start shooting in there or firing RPG at the wall, and then the villagers would move me somewhere else. So it was kind of chaotic and stressful for sure.
It's amazing to think that after everything you had survived, that you could have been killed at that moment or at the moment you're being rescued. I mean, that's just insane. So the moment they came to get you, do you remember the first thing they said to you?
They called my name out. I'll never forget it. I heard it in English for the first time. And I was draped over these two guys, and my head was down because they were having to drag me through the mountains. And I looked up, and this old boy came down the mountain. The two of them I could see very vividly. And I grabbed that guy. I mean, I never hugged a man like that. I was like, get in here, bro. I just wanted to make sure he was real, because I was real sick by then. And, he called me by my name. And they picked me up and took me into this stable. Right underneath on the side of the mountain, there was this stable down there that they would keep the mules in. And they laid me down in there and started bandaging me up. And then that's when they juiced me for the first time. And they got me out of there. Yeah, that happened. But it was crazy for sure.
The Michael Berry Show.